Telkom is potentially backing down from its attempt to interdict Icasa over an upcoming broadband spectrum auction. This after MTN, Vodacom South Africa, Rain and the government itself came out opposing the application. Spectrum is an invisible but essential resource that President Cyril Ramaphosa says is key to strengthening the economy. This is the latest in a dispute that has drawn out for years. Why is spectrum so important and what is likely to happen next? Well, Duncan McLeod is the editor of TechCentral. He's here to help us make sense of this story. Duncan, I'll get to Telkom and the court case in just a few minutes, but explain to our viewers why the issue of spectrum is not just a telecommunications industry issue, that it affects you and I, the man on the street, and how it affects us.
Sure. Very briefly, to try and summarize a very complicated subject, very briefly, the release of additional spectrum is very important for making more broadband services available to South African consumers and doing so more cheaply. We haven't released spectrum to mobile operators in more than 15 years. The last time spectrum was licensed was actually for 3G services, and so we're way behind schedule here. And of course, this is all interrelated, as you know, with the digital migration project, which involves getting television broadcasters out of certain spectrum bands that can be repurposed for mobile broadband. So it's all about making broadband cheaper and more available and faster and better for South African consumers. And at the end of the day, that is going to have a dramatic impact, or should have a dramatic impact, on economic growth, which is why it's so important that this project is fast-tracked and is concluded. And we know that the President Cyril Ramaphosa has made this one of his top priorities.
Duncan, Telkom says it might withdraw its interdict to stop the spectrum auction going ahead. Have they actually decided to withdraw the interdict, or is it something they're still waiting to make a decision on? And why this sudden change of heart?
Well, it's very fluid at the moment, and I think things are changing by the hour as we speak. But a couple of days ago, Telkom wrote to other respondents in its litigation. We know it's taking Icasa to court. It's not happy with the invitation to apply to participate in the upcoming spectrum auction, and it had two parts to that application. That it brought part A was to, in effect, to bring an interdict to stop the process in its tracks while the merits were argued. It's now written to other participants in the litigation, including the Minister of Communications and Icasa and Vodacom and MTN and others, to say that they're willing to forego the first part of that application, being the application for the urgent interdict against Icasa to stop the process, saying that it's aware that the spectrum needs to be allocated urgently and that an interdict could result in lengthy delays, which they don't want. It's entirely possible the political pressure is being brought to bear on Telkom to take this position. It's entirely possible that's happening. It's entirely possible that Telkom feels so strongly in its position that it believes it's simply going to win on the merits when the case is heard, possibly in March. And it's possibly both, in fact. It's quite possible that Telkom is both under political pressure and confident it's going to win its case. So it's going to be very interesting to watch, and we should see further developments today in terms of some of the respondents to the Telkom litigation to see if they agree with this proposal and whether this matter is going to be heard on its merits in March before the auction takes place. Seems unlikely at this stage, but we should get further insights this afternoon as some of these respondents begin to respond to Telkom's letter of 2 days ago.
Duncan, what issues exactly does Telkom have, and why does it seem like they're out on their own with these issues, that they're the only ones taking this position while the rest of the industry wants this auction to go ahead?
Well, the operators are absolutely desperate for spectrum. Telkom has been accused by some parties, including Vodacom, of deliberately stalling the allocation of new radio frequency spectrum. Vodacom has insinuated that it's not in Telkom's interests to have the spectrum allocated in the short term because it will only strengthen its competitors, especially while it doesn't have access to the sub-1 gigahertz bands that are still being used by analog, or still being used by television broadcasters like the SABC and ETV. Telkom is arguing, there are a number of components to Telkom's argument. One of them is that Icasa has not provided sufficient certainty in the market through its invitation to apply, and it wants greater certainty on the broadcast migration before it goes ahead. Telkom is the only company that does not have access to the low-band spectrum that is particularly suitable for rolling out infrastructure in rural areas, and it's desperate to get access to that. It's got a number of concerns, but those are the primary ones. It's also concerned about the wholesale open access network. The government's plan to increase competition in the market, particularly in the service side of the market. The whole WOAN concept seems to have gone fairly quiet, and it's not clear whether government is even going to go ahead with it at this stage. So there are a lot of balls that are in the air right now, and I think we're going to get greater clarity in the days and weeks ahead. But there's a lot happening now, a lot of litigation. Lawyers are very, very busy, and no doubt making a lot of money as well.
All right, Duncan, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. TechCentral's Duncan McLeod.